I'm Lai Liang with the Center for Presidential History at SMU, and I'm with Admiral Thomas Fargo, and today is September 23rd, 2016. Admiral Fargo, let's start with the years when you were still Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet.
All right.
What were the U.S. objectives in the Pacific in those years?
Well, I think I took over in October of 1999 at the end of the Clinton administration. And I think the objectives at the end of the Clinton administration and the start of the Bush administration in Asia were pretty consistent. There was a solid understanding from a national security perspective that the majority of our vital security interests were in Asia. I mean, economically, politically, diplomatically, that's where the future was, and that we needed to spend the preponderance of our effort and resources in that area. And that's the way we certainly started. And of course, events changed and 9/11 happened, and obviously some of that effort was diluted by the war on terrorism.
So from your standpoint at that time, how did those objectives translate into what you did?
Well, obviously the most important part was to ensure that we were in support of our treaty allies. And we've got 5 treaty allies and a number of great partners in Asia, and ensuring we met our treaty obligations, certainly in Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia, were hugely important. And those security arrangements were fundamental to my responsibilities. That involved certainly engaging all of those key players, whether it was Japan, Korea, Australia, Singapore, our ASEAN partners, and to a growing extent, India. So my responsibilities were to ensure that we met our requirements for forward presence, which was a big piece of the deterrent capability that we provided as part of those alliances. In addition, obviously the training and readiness of the Pacific Fleet. At that point in time, we probably had around 160 ships, 1,400 aircraft, and we needed to ensure that those folks were at a state of readiness that would allow them to meet the responsibilities I just laid out earlier.
Mm-hmm. Some people have criticized the Clinton administration for showing benign neglect. I think it was a term used, in terms of Asia. Any truth in that, you think?
I think benign neglect may be a little strong. There was certainly a view, I think, from the start of the Bush administration that the Clinton administration had kind of ceded some of their responsibilities in terms of security policy in Asia to the military. You probably remember Dana Priest wrote a book called, I think was The Commanders, and talked about combatant commanders being the proconsuls of the different geographic areas of responsibility. And of course, my predecessor as the PACOM commander, Admiral Blair, was featured in that book. And I think there was some truth that where there is not attention and significant effort and engagement at the civilian level, I mean, the military will, as just part of their normal responsibilities, not because they're interested in usurping any of the responsibilities of the civilian leadership, will fill that void space in terms of engagement. And I think that's kind of the foundation of that concern.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to 9/11 itself. So speaking personally, on the day of 9/11, where were you? And what was your reaction?
Well, I remember it very clearly. I was, of course, there was a 6-hour difference between Hawaii and the East Coast, so I was in bed, and I got an immediate call from my executive assistant, who's now Vice Admiral Pete Daly, and he called and said, "You need to turn the TV on." He said, there's been a plane that's gone into the World Trade Center. We don't know what the situation is, but turn your TV on and we'll talk in a few minutes. And so I turned the TV on, and that was in time to see the second plane hit the World Trade Center. And so we recognized at that point in time that obviously this had been an attack. So I told him to have the operational staff, the senior leadership in the headquarters at 5:30 in the morning, and we assembled because we had to deal first off with what were the force protection implications for the rest of our area of responsibility. And my area of responsibility ran at that point in time from essentially the west coast of the for the Navy, from the west coast of the United States through India. And we did not know whether this was the first of many attacks or whether this was the end of it. As we know, there were a couple more that occurred shortly thereafter. But making sure we had an appropriate force protection posture was the first order of business.
What was your reaction personally? What sort of thoughts ran through your mind?
Well, I'd spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I went out and took over command of the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain 3 weeks after the Khobar Towers attack. And so I had kind of lived through this ratcheting up of attacks that had occurred primarily by Al-Qaeda. And there was Khobar Towers. And before that, there was the Opium Sang attack. And then, of course, in Tanzania and Nairobi, and then the Cole. So, I saw this as the next step in that continuum of, an attack by Al-Qaeda on our nation.
Did you feel like you were working with good intelligence at that time?
Well, I think intelligence is, as everybody always says, everything's either an intelligence success or an intelligence failure or an operational success. Intelligence is probably about on average as to what we have been able to do over the years. I mean, I don't think we were in an intelligence lull like we had been in some prior times where, for example, human intelligence, was underfunded and undervalued. But nobody's crystal ball is ever completely clear. And intelligence is a matter of piecing together bits and pieces of information. And people that think that you have this absolute clarity or a clear definition of what's going to happen at any point in time, that's just not the way it is.
Did you get any immediate orders after the initial phone call?
Well, we first of all, we dealt with the immediate security situations in my area of responsibility, and then of course there were a number of collaborative sessions, VTCs, sessions with the two people that I was working with. Which one is I worked in an operational sense for the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Command, which was Admiral Blair, and then obviously I worked for the Chief of Naval Operations in my capacity as the naval head within the Pacific. So we had a number of conversations in direction. Most of them dealt with both force protection and, of course, the readiness to respond for the Pacific Fleet.
And was there a sense that things were in place, things were how they should have been?
Well, I think the readiness levels were certainly fine at that point in time. But I think you have to recognize that we deploy a certain number of forces for a period of time to meet our obligations. When you go to war, that all changes, and clearly we were going to have to be prepared to surge large numbers of forces to deal with whatever plan was eventually developed and executed in the Central Command specifically, as well as meet our responsibilities in Asia and the Pacific. So that means that you're going to have to bring a greater number of forces to a higher level of readiness. And so we embarked on that immediately.
When was the first communication that you got from the civilian leadership? When did you begin to get a sense of what might be going on within the civilian leadership, Secretary of Defense saying?
Well, that's not my lane, right? So I'm the Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet right now. So I'm working for Admiral Blair. So the way the chain of command would work in this particular sense is that the civilian leadership would provide direction to Admiral Blair as the unified commander, or combatant commander as we now call it, within the Pacific, and then I'd receive direction from him operationally. Now, administratively, in terms of force protection, those directives would come from the Chief of Naval Operations.
Okay. So once the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 became clear, was there a shift of resources to the Pacific? Was there immediate awareness that that might be part of the front in the war against terror?
No, actually, the shift in resources really occurred. I'm a force provider as the Pacific Fleet Commander, and so the shift of resources was going to be from taking Pacific Fleet resources and moving them to the Central Command, to the Middle East, essentially the Persian Gulf, the North Arabian Sea, to support that effort. First in Afghanistan and then later in Iraq. So in the Atlantic, they would deploy forces, into that area also, but through the Mediterranean and the Suez Canal. So there wasn't a shift of forces from the Atlantic to the Pacific at this point in time. It was really taking the forces that I had within the Pacific Fleet and providing support to the Commander-in-Chief of the Central Command.
Okay. When did it become clear that the Pacific, or Southeast Asia in particular, might be part of this front?
Well, I think it was clear at the outset, or even before. I mean, obviously you mentioned intelligence before. I mean, we knew there were operatives in the Philippines, in Indonesia, to a lesser extent, Malaysia. We were concerned about Thailand because Bangkok is a place that people can transit, very openly and freely. And of course, in the aftermath of the attack, as we found out, there were meetings that took place in Malaysia, and certainly Bangkok was a place where these terrorist groups, had access to and traveled through. So this was not something that we weren't aware of. It wasn't a complete surprise, but understanding the depth of the cells and terrorist connections was something that developed in better detail after 9/11.
So you were confirmed as the commander for U.S. PACOM in 2002, May 2002.
Right.
So that was well within the year of the 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
What were your first priorities when you took command?
Well, I think the first priority was to make sure that we could support the larger effort in the Middle East. Obviously, we had to meet our basic responsibilities in terms of security in Asia and the Western Pacific, and I've already outlined what those were. And so the challenge was going to be to, with the resources that we had and the obligations we had to support the war effort, to make sure that we didn't diminish either the security of the United States and our allies and the American citizens that were in Asia, and to ensure that we could meet kind of the engagement responsibilities, because the last thing that we wanted to do was create a vacuum in Asia during this period of time. Mm-hmm. A security vacuum. Yeah.
Right. in your confirmation hearings, you highlighted counterterrorism as the major, overwhelmingly major priority. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, and that took on a number of efforts. Obviously, you're familiar with the effort in the Philippines. Admiral Blair had initially stood up a task force in the southern Philippines in the Sulu area. There was an insurgency, the Abu Sayyaf in Basilan. They had obviously taken hostages in the past, and there were concerns about their connection to Al Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. So this was a key focus. I spent a great deal of time on making sure that that joint task force was both had the right training and direction for success. We were very concerned about Indonesia and making sure that our relationship with the Indonesian government was strong and effective, and that we could provide them support to deal with the terrorist threat there. And of course, as you remember, there were a couple of attacks that occurred, the Marriott and being the foremost one in my mind. And we were also concerned about operatives throughout the region, making sure that we could develop the intelligence and support all of these countries, whether it was the Philippines or Indonesia or Malaysia or Thailand or Singapore for that matter, to be able to find and ensure that those operatives couldn't carry out another attack. So, obviously what we were concerned about was an attack of any magnitude, a terrorist attack within Asia and in the Pacific. And so, as I said in my testimony, that was at the top of the list of things that I had to ensure were properly dealt with.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned earlier that counterterrorism was, thanks to intelligence gathering, already something you were aware of, that was an effort that you recognized was necessary in that area of the world even before 9/11. Did the approach change in any way? Did the focus change in any way? Or strategy change?
Well, I think certainly the resources changed. In terms of the focus. I'm obviously in the day-to-day pre-9/11 business. When you're talking about intelligence resources, you've got North Korea, Russia, China. Some of the traditional concerns within Asia and the Pacific, and very clearly there was a key shift in how you prioritize those intelligence resources to deal with the threat that was upon us.
Was approaching counterterrorism in Southeast Asia different than approaching counterterrorism in the Middle East, say? Was it very different?
Well, I don't know if it's different, but I'll talk to my approach, which was it's pretty clear that you weren't going to solve the terrorist issue in Asia and the Pacific just by interdicting terrorists and killing terrorists, because Indonesia is the largest Muslim population in the world. I think India is probably the second largest Muslim population in the world. So it was clear to us that we had to deal with the ideological aspects of terrorism, and certainly the relationship with these countries in terms of our values and their values. These are large democracies, right? And ensuring that we dealt with this thing from that perspective. And of course, that has to do with things like the madrasas, in Indonesia, where that kind of ideological effort is made on the wrong side of the solution. And so I think we felt that the long-term solution to terrorism in Asia and the Pacific was to further develop these relationships, and we worked very hard on that. And that's not to say that we weren't going to interdict terrorists, in Asia and the Pacific if we had, but it was a different problem than I think, the concentration of Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, for example.
Could you talk a little bit more about that? You mentioned the madrasas and approaching it differently. How did that actually work in concrete terms?
Well, in concrete terms, it worked on a mill-to-mill level. My counterpart in Indonesia was a guy named Sutarto, right? And we tried to build personal relationships with each of the key leaders, whether it was in Malaysia or Indonesia or the Philippines. The Philippines were harder because they kept changing the military leadership about every 9 months. But I think we were pretty successful in Malaysia and Indonesia, and by although we had significant restrictions based on the Pressler Amendment in Indonesia, but I think developing those relationships and kind of building a common understanding of what the military role was and how the military, worked within the civilian control and what their proper relationships were, and how the military in a counter-terrorist effort can be effective. So we spent an awful lot of time in precisely that direction.
And what was the reception like?
Well, I thought it was probably at the start a little suspect, but you know how these relationships work. The first time it's a kind of a pro forma, and I probably every opportunity we could to either make a visit in country, have a reciprocal visit, talk about these things at the Chief of Defense conferences, use opportunities like the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore. All these were part of the collective effort to build those relationships, and they certainly paid off during the tsunami relief effort when we saw a real world event, and the relationships came together to produce a very favorable outcome.
Did you have a chance to meet with the local Muslim leaders as well?
Not until really the tsunami relief effort up in Aceh during that period of time. But in advance of that, I did not.
Did you get a sense that, especially with the war in Iraq, of the rising anti-Americanism? Was that something that?
Well, sure, that was something we were very concerned about, and obviously all that I just talked about was part and parcel to ensuring we could mitigate those concerns, and there was a flavor of that, and the question was, how do we deliver our message, to these countries, and it's not solely a military effort. We worked, very closely with the country teams, with each ambassador, with the USAID, with the entire country team in each of these critical countries, especially in Southeast Asia, to ensure that we developed the right message and could project it appropriately. And one of the advantages that the military has coming in is we've got resources. We've got people. We're conducting exercises on a regular basis. We're using institutions like the Asian Pacific Center, that does civil military training, and we bring the leaders, both civilian and military, to Honolulu, to the Asian Pacific Center. So we've got a lot of different tools and techniques to help with that, and I think that helped mitigate those concerns.
Now, some people have said that maybe because the military was the actor that had the most resources, that it seemed that for a few years after 9/11, the military aspect of U.S. foreign policy became the face of U.S. foreign policy in that part of the world. What would you say to that?
Well, we're talking about specifically Asia and the Pacific. I think the engagement of the military and throughout Asia and the Pacific has been very consistent over the last 40, 50 years. People look at these things as if there's a spike here. We've had the 7th Fleet forward deployed in Northeast Asia for 50 years. They run exercises throughout the Western Pacific. And what I saw was, essentially that we were fortunate. We were able to keep these exercises like Cobra Gold in Thailand and our exercises in Australia continuing. I mean, we probably, in some respects, maybe changed the some of the objectives a little bit. They probably had more of a counterterrorism aspect to them than they did in the past. But I think one of the goodness of this is that we don't change that look, those relationships, those objectives dramatically, and so we've been very consistent, and I think that's helpful because when 9/11 occurred, when we had this very serious threat to our nation, we're not riding in there into Southeast Asia for the first time. I mean, they're not just seeing us. It's not all of a sudden we're important. It's a very consistent effort.
I recall at that time some of the Asian leaders or mid-level officers were a little taken aback, maybe even offended by the idea that Southeast Asia was called the second front in the war against terror. Was that just rhetoric, or was that a meaningful term?
Well, there were a lot of sensitivities, and as you probably remember, I got involved with one of them. We were talking, immediately after 9/11. We talked to the ASEAN partners, and there were, in addition to the United States, India, and other countries helped with kind of patrols in the Malacca Strait because we were, very concerned that this is a key and vital choke point with which, we had to ensure all of the surrounding countries were secure, and you can imagine something as serious as a large ship, loaded with explosives, it turns into Singapore. So, that effort came in a congressional testimony. I indicated that we were working with the Philippines to put Marines on ships that could deal with the counter-terrorist efforts, largely in southern Mindanao. A French reporter took the two pieces and said that I had recommended we put Marines on ships in the Malacca Strait, and that caused a very emotional reaction both in Malaysia and in Indonesia, not Singapore. The Singhs clearly understood what I said, and the Defense Minister Chio Tae-hin and I had a solid conversation and understanding. But I did have to go to Malaysia and talk to the Defense Minister and make sure he understood what we were talking about. That really we, our efforts were in support of them, and we were trying to help them build capacity to deal with their own, regional efforts, and that was the approach. But it goes to your point that there were a lot of sensitivities at that point in time, and then that followed on with kind of the eye in the sky effort where we got Singapore and Malaysia and Indonesia to coordinate an effort to provide surveillance over the Malacca Strait and other efforts to build coordination within that particular key area.
So that was the RMSI that you were referring to.
Yeah, it was called the Regional Maritime Security Initiative, and it actually started much earlier. It wasn't. It was the idea of RMSI was that we ought to have the same visibility of the maritime space as we have of our airspace. In other words, a plane takes off today, and we essentially know who's on board, where it's going, and what its status is at each point in time. Well, we didn't have that kind of transparency, throughout the maritime space. So we built RMSI as an idea that would be a collaborative function with all the nations of the region to provide visibility. Well, like a lot of things, sometimes they get just, I guess you'd say, derailed by an event. Well, eventually RMSI, since we had to kind of shelve the term over the emotional response, became maritime domain awareness. And in another term, another incarnation, the same objectives.
And would you say that effort was a success once it came under?
Yeah, I think it was a success, and certainly I think people knew that this was a needed capability. We were coming up and satisfying an unmet need, because that's a key security concern, and it not only dealt with terrorism, obviously, and in a peacetime environment, it deals with trafficking of humans, drugs, all proliferation of weapons, things like that. So, that's a key capability that was needed. Yeah.
What do you think account for those sensitivities?
Well, it's there's never clarity of information, throughout the full domain, and I think this is not unlike what you see in any number of issues where people don't really understand precisely what you're trying to accomplish it, why you're trying to accomplish it, and how you're doing it, and so it requires a very high level of effort in terms of making sure that you're providing a consistent message, that you're talking to the leadership on a regular basis and reinforcing this message, and that between you and the nations of the region, you're projecting that message in a manner in which the people can understand it. As I said, I don't think it's a phenomena that we should be surprised about. It occurs in any number of issues, both domestic and international, and it's one of the challenges you deal with.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it also betrays perhaps a lack of political will on the part of some of the governments in that region at that time?
Well, it's some governments are stronger than others, right? Some leaders are stronger than others, and we can go back and look at different periods of time. I would say that during President Yudhoyono's period of time in Indonesia, I was very impressed with the manner in which he projected first the will to deal with a potential terrorist problem, the ability to engage, across all the religious segments of his society, his ability to use the military in a responsible, professional manner, and frankly, I was hugely impressed with during his period of leadership how he dealt with a terrorist threat within his country very effectively, and look at Indonesia today.
What were your impressions of President Megawati? Because that was mostly when you were there.
Yeah, well, I don't think she was engaged at the same level, and it's difficult. These are difficult political problems, and and it was a new problem also. During there were issues there during that period of time, as we've talked about, and attacks that were conducted. Frankly, President Yudhoyono was more effective.
Did you notice a change in the Indonesia's attitude after they themselves had experienced terrorist attacks in Bali and then, of course, in Jakarta?
Well, there's nothing that focuses your attention than being at the center of that event. I think I was actually in Indonesia probably a month or 2 months after the bombing at the Marriott Hotel. I stayed at the Marriott because I really believed that the Indonesian government got it, and that the security throughout Jakarta was much improved. I think it certainly removes the deniability piece of this thing, and the folks that say it couldn't happen, it happened here. And the Indonesian people are a very, very moderate culture. I think they didn't want it amongst their provinces, whether it's down in Bali or Jakarta or up in Aceh. And so I think I don't think they were ignoring it when that happened, but I think it certainly focused their attention.
Did PACOM play a role at all in trying to forge a peace deal between the government and the Aceh freedom movement?
I wouldn't say PACOM did. Obviously the U.S. government, had a role there. But we were very aware of the situation. We were closely connected to it from a standpoint of understanding the seriousness of it and the deliberations that were going on. But that wasn't really our role. The country team and certainly the Department of State were in the lead there.
Yeah, I just asked that because I just wonder if that was part and parcel of counterterrorism to preempt terror attacks coming from that end.
Yeah, and of course, the issues here are dealing with the difference between what's terrorism and what's an insurgency, and that's in a place like Aceh, that's a place where those lines blur to a huge deal, and you got to be careful that you're dealing with the right problem. We need to be dealing, in my view, we need to be dealing with Al Qaeda, and that was the focus.
Was there the same sensibility in the Philippines as well? Because there was Abu Sayyaf, but there were also
Yeah, there was the same sensibility, and certainly, but the connections between these groups in Sulu, Abu Sayyaf, and Al Qaeda were a little closer. In other words, there was more evidence that they'd received some support there. But that said, as you remember, we went into Basilan. One of the first things we did was try to build a road around the island so that people could get to schools, and then we built wells, and we also made this an engineering effort, because our view was that if you could improve the lot of the people on Basilan, then they would essentially run the Abu Sayyaf out of their province. It was both help train and assist the Philippine military in dealing with the Abu Sayyaf. We were in a supporting role there, and also dealing with the people, and from out of Zamboanga and up to Basilan, and then later on up into the rest of the Sulu provinces.
What were your impressions of President Arroyo?
Well, I spent a great deal of time with President Arroyo. Matter of fact, on one visit, this is an interesting story. I was paying a call on her. Actually, we were at the airport because she was going down to Mindanao, and I was going someplace else, I think. And we're sitting there talking at the airport, and I asked her about Mindanao and what she thought the security situation was, and she said, "Well, I'm flying down there right now. Why don't you come with me?" And so she said, "I've got room for two, you and one other." And this was absolutely off the cuff. And I said, "Sure, I'm happy to go." So we flew down to the south, and they were opening up a water project that the Japanese had funded, and so we spent 2 hours talking about the Southern Mindanao and the MNLF, and the history of all this and how it impacted the Abu Sayyaf and those security efforts down there. So I think there's always been an effort to solve that problem and to get to kind of a peaceful situation down there. Have been a couple of them that have been brokered, but I thought she was reasonably well engaged on the issue.
Some people have said that she might have actually tried to, for lack of a better word, exploit the war on terror in order to fight her own anti-separatist effort. Would you say there's any truth in that?
Well, of course, she had two issues to deal with, right? She had the situation in southern Mindanao, and of course, she had the issue in the north with the communists. Both of which were kind of chipping away at her, I guess you'd say, governance of the Philippines. I can't really comment on whether she was using that situation to exploit it. We had pretty clear objectives as to what we were trying to do. Our effort was modest in terms of resources and people, and I think appropriate for the level of threat.
Was there ever any talk about introducing? I think the media had reported once or twice that that there might have been some talk, perhaps from the Department of Defense and the civilian part of the Department of Defense, about introducing more troops or ground troops into the Philippines. Did that ever trickle down to you?
Well, we looked at a whole bunch of different options within the southern Philippines, but we really felt this was an effort where the Philippine military needed to lead the effort. They had actually pretty robust forces in the southern Philippines. Our effort was to provide a special forces group that could help with obviously intelligence, training. We outfitted, I think it was 3 Philippine special forces companies and trained them. So this was clearly a train and assist mission. We provide our advice and counsel and so on, as we've done in many of these situations with special operations forces. It's one of their core capabilities, but I don't think there was any serious consideration of putting any significant contingent of U.S. forces there. Matter of fact, my conversations with the Secretary of Defense is he was absolutely against that, and I agreed completely with him.
And what were relations with Thailand like in terms of counterterrorism?
Well, they're very good. We had a very strong mill-to-mill relationship. I had access to the Prime Minister. There were some interesting meetings with him about his relationship with the United States. But I think the level of cooperation with the Thai military was very strong. Ongoing exercises such as Cobra Gold, as I mentioned, We had a very strong Just Mag operation there within Thailand, maybe one of the largest within the Pacific. Thailand was very closely connected to Burma and obviously Myanmar at that point in time, and really provided most of the insight that I had came through Thailand. We had an attaché that moved kind of back and forth from Thailand to Myanmar. We had a very robust counter-drug effort, up on the border between Thailand and Myanmar. So the level of cooperation was significant.
And what about the Malay separatists in the south? Did you?
Pardon me?
The Malay separatists?
Yeah, the Malay separatists were a continuing problem, and obviously, as you know, there were attacks that happened on a somewhat regular basis. This was clearly an internal Thai problem. We talked to them about it. We tried to be helpful, but we didn't have any direct engagement there, other than maybe slightly on the intelligence side.
So there was no concern there about terrorism arising from
There was a lot of concern and a lot of very in-depth intelligence work as to, is this going to be a breeding ground for terrorists? Is it a sanctuary for terrorists? And we looked at it on both sides of the equation. I actually made a trip in Malaysia right up to the border there of southern Thailand with the Malaysian commander, so he could show me the movement across the border and what his concerns were. And so I don't want to indicate that we weren't paying attention, because we clearly were, but it never rose to the level where I think we thought that our security, or the security of the regional partners, was going to be impacted by it.
If I remember correctly, the capture of Hambali, that was in that area, wasn't it? Were you involved at all in that exercise?
I'd have to go back and search my memory on that one, exactly where that took place.
Yeah. Was PACOM involved in that operation at all?
I can't talk about that at all.
Let's talk about Malaysia.
Okay.
To what degree did you or PACOM help to set up the counterterrorism center there?
Well, we had a very strong relationship with on the mill-to-mill level. The commander in Malaysia at the time was General Zahidi. I think he was in command there for maybe over 5 years. A very solid leader who I thought did a superb job of understanding the issues and building an appropriate counter-terrorist capability. He was a superb partner. In all of these situations in Malaysia, we tried to make it clear that you need to let us know what you need in terms of capacity building. Where can we be helpful? And I thought that and once again, primarily special forces, the support piece there was very solid.
Mm-hmm. So I've read in some places that some criticism that the center was not as effective as it could have been.
Not as effective as it could have been is always probably a pretty fair criticism, but I don't have a specific to provide you.
Some critics have suggested that because of the U.S. focus on counterterrorism in general, that it sort of gave cover to some of these governments who were not always, signed on to democratic practices all the time, to use counterterrorism as a cover against their own political dissidents. Was that something that you were aware of, and did you try to mitigate that in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was, obviously that was a criticism that was out there. Probably nowhere was it more forceful than in the early days of my tenure in Indonesia. As you know, the Special Operations Forces in Indonesia had a reputation of oppressing different parts of their society. That resulted in the Presler Amendment. We were restricted from engagement with their Special Operations Forces for a very significant period of time. Some of that criticism was fully justified. And of course we spent a lot of time, trying to both overcome that and not work around it, but kind of rehabilitate the Indonesian special forces. So that's one example. I would say in the Philippines, that criticism was maybe not justified at the same level, but yeah, there probably were abuses there to some degree.
And in Thailand or Malaysia?
Not as much in Thailand, at least that we were involved in. Not as much in Malaysia that I actually saw. I mean, we in places like the Philippines, of course, and I worried very much when we went to outfit, 3 companies of Philippine military with counter-terrorist capabilities, that this had to be a very controlled evolution. There had to be vetting of these companies. Control of the weapons was hugely important. In Indonesia, the vetting of military people was a huge and ongoing effort. To make sure that folks that could abuse this situation, were eliminated from the equation. So yeah, it's a valid concern, and we worked hard to eradicate it.
And how did you partner with Singapore?
Well, Singapore is a very close partner. The Defense Minister, Teo Chee-hen, I'd known since I was a captain and he was the 39-year-old commander of their Navy, so we had a long relationship. Singapore went out of their way during this period of time to ensure that they were a very strong security partner. Any number of examples. They built a pier, in Singapore that was equipped and able to handle not only U.S. Navy port visits, but a U.S. aircraft carrier. We built a center, a coordination center within Singapore that allowed the sharing of intelligence both bilaterally and multilaterally, and would allow the control of multilateral operations, throughout the region. We had partnerships on ammunition storage, any number of areas. I think they were a very responsible and exceptional partner, and pleasure to work with them.
Moving back to decision making among U.S. officials with regard to policy towards the Pacific at this time, was there a lot of discussion about how best to approach that region of the world, or was it pretty much, or were you given a lot of autonomy?
I think clearly the with all the effort going on in the Middle East, yeah, as you point out, we were kind of a secondary theater. And, I had any number of conversations with the Secretary of Defense about counter-terrorist operations in the Philippines and other parts of the area. But, in terms of, order of magnitude, the threat there just wasn't at the same level that it was in the Middle East. So I don't know if autonomy is the right word, but in our discussions, both with defense and state, we didn't have a huge problem there, and the problems were manageable, and as a result, the attention. It wasn't that we were neglected. It's just you got to focus on where the main event is, and that's what happened.
I'm sure you're aware of this. There's been a lot of talk about how there were both personality and issues that cause conflict, at the cabinet level between state and defense.
Yeah. I'm supposed to keep a straight face here, right? Yeah.
Did any of that trickle down? Did you ever feel that you were hearing something different from different people and?
No, I mean I was well aware of it all, but it didn't impact my job at all. I mean, I'm working for the Secretary of Defense. I got clear guidance as to what I needed to do. I didn't see any contradictory signals whatsoever. Coming out of the State Department. I met with the Secretary of State and the Deputy Secretary of State when it was appropriate, when they were in the region or there was a reason to in Washington D.C. So in terms of fulfilling my responsibilities, it wasn't a problem.
To what degree in your interactions with Secretary Rumsfeld, to what degree were you proposing ideas that he was receptive to, and to what degree was it more of a do this?
Well, I think let me talk about kind of the key areas that were important during that period of time. I mean, obviously the Philippine counter-terrorist piece was one point, and we worked out a plan and presented it to him. I would tell you the Secretary was skeptical about the Philippines' ability to meet their responsibilities. There was no surprise there whatsoever. So we had to work through to come up with a construct that would meet our objectives. But he was clearly suspect of the Philippines' ability to do what they say and say what they do, and I think those are probably his words. I spent a great deal of time with the Secretary on China policy and China planning. I wouldn't say policy. The policy obviously came out of Washington, but China planning. He was he spent a lot of time and effort and engaged personally on the planning in China, and just despite all that was going on in the Middle East, he was clearly focused on that because he recognized that China was going to be a huge player going forward. We spent a lot of time on Korea. Korea was important from a standpoint that, of course, the footprint in Korea hadn't changed in something like 50 years. We needed to use some of that force structure in the Middle East, and this was a logical time to figure out a new force posture and footprint in Korea, and we kind of started on the path of changing that command relationship in Korea also. He wanted to move quickly on it. I understood that. It didn't come out that way. We still haven't gotten to the command relationship changes that we think ultimately are the right outcome. But that was a key focus. And then and then probably on a larger, broader issue throughout Asia and the Pacific, we produced a new force posture and footprint for Asia and the Pacific that we thought, would certainly address lots of concerns that had built up, over the last couple of decades. In Japan, issues such as Atsugi, where we had a naval air station there, but the encroachment around the naval air station, had gotten to the point where there were safety issues. So we needed to move some of that air wing structure to Iwakuni into a new runway that not only met our needs but had a better safety posture and remove some of the irritants to the local communities. Obviously, Okinawa had been an ongoing issue, especially since 1996, and we put together a new plan for Okinawa that would move some part of that force structure to Guam and take advantage of Guam as a strategic asset, because Guam had been kind of diminished in the base closure process over the years. In Korea, we recognized we had a bunch of old and unacceptable facilities north of Seoul, too many of them. We needed to change the concentration, move it south, get out of Yonge, get out of Seoul, move down to Camp Humphreys, build a more sustainable force posture for the future. Southeast Asia, obviously, Singapore, some of the initiatives that were there, probably recognizing we needed to spend more time in Southeast Asia, trying to figure out, how we could have, what has traditionally been called places as opposed to bases. We weren't looking at putting up flag poles, but we were looking for, access, training, multilateral capabilities that could deal with contingency operations. So, those are kind of four key efforts that that PACOM and I was working with Secretary Rumsfeld, and most of those are either complete or ongoing today.
Mm-hmm. Now, some people have said that, even with what you said about Secretary Rumsfeld being keenly aware of China and its importance, that because of the overwhelming focus on the Middle East in those days, that perhaps more could have been done to check China, and that perhaps we might not have some of the issues that we face today with regards to China had there been a little bit more attention. Do you think there's any basis for statements like that?
Well, I think there's some truth in the fact that obviously there's a limited amount of cabinet level resources that have to be spread around the world, and during that period of time, of course, with Afghanistan and Iraq, that consumed an awful lot of that effort. Would that have changed outcomes in China? I doubt it. I mean, I think, China has a view of themselves as a great power. They're going to build a military that they believe to be consistent with a great power status. My sense is that even if you'd have applied more energy, and I'm not even saying we didn't apply enough energy at that level, I'm not sure we'd be in a different situation today than we are.
Did you work closely with China in terms of counterterrorism too, say the Uyghurs?
No, and I think I made a number of visits to China. I actually went out and they gave me a view of their counterterrorism capability out in an exercise they put on. It was absolutely canned. My perception, this was probably 2003 or 2004, is that their counterterrorism capability was actually very modest and not nearly as well developed as obviously our own or even our allies like Australia and New Zealand folks of that. And I, I did make one trip to Western China just to get a feel for the situation there. But we weren't involved in any coordinated efforts to deal with their insurgent problems.
Was there an attempt to reach out to do more coordination?
It just wasn't. There was clearly an attempt to improve the mill-to-mill relationship. Some of our ability to coordinate that was limited by the Defense Authorization Act. If you remember, there were multiple restrictions on our ability to engage in very specific areas. This was one of them, so wasn't a focus. Now other areas, maritime cooperation, maritime coordination, being able to coordinate in airspace, dealing with the incidents that occurred. On my watch, we had the EP3 incident. We had the intercept in the Yellow Sea on both in the air piece with the surveillance aircraft as well as on the maritime side with the Tago ships.
One criticism that's been levied against State Department officials is that they could have worked more with regional platforms rather than building, focusing on bilateral relationships.
Yeah.
Was that something that did you guys do things differently?
Well, we do them a little differently, but I think everybody's trying to get to the same end state. But it's a fair criticism in that, most ambassadors have responsibility for their country, and they don't cross country lines at all, right? And so and you've got an Assistant Secretary of East Asia that's trying to pull all this together into a coherent fashion, and but because they don't have quite the flexibility of the military commanders do. I mean, I got a 7th Fleet commander out there in Japan that moves throughout the entire area and visits all these countries and all these military commanders and has a relationship with all of them. It's a little tougher for the State Department. Now, they did. I think Jim Kelly understood this, and during my tenure, we put together a number of opportunities where all the chiefs of mission from the region came together, and we eventually actually did it at PACOM ultimately because it was a good place to do it. I think the two that I was involved with, we actually did them in Hawaii, but not in PACOM. We did them at another meeting facility, but an opportunity to bring all of the chiefs of mission together. But that's it's tougher for them to do that than it is for the military. I think there's a clear understanding that it needs to happen, but they don't travel to the same degree that the military leadership does.
Did you work with, was PACOM present or active in terms of working with the ARF or ASEAN at that sort of regional level? If
in terms of the ASEAN Regional Forum, in the latter stages, we started to play a role in supporting some of the civilian initiatives that came out of the ASEAN Regional Forum. But it wasn't a place that I stopped in and saw the ASEAN Council or met with those folks as a group. Probably the place where we were more affected, the forum that we thought had real value was the Shangri-La Dialogue, because once the Shangri-La Dialogue started, and you're going to have to help me with the date, 2001 or so, no, 2000, maybe 2002. I think I was the first person to go. That provided clearly the Secretary of Defense an opportunity to meet with all of his counterparts and have the kind of the bilateral conversations on the side of the Shangri-La Dialogue that were very important. Before that, we didn't have any other forum really in Asia that was quite that robust. And the military played a supporting role. At the start, matter of fact, the first year I was the senior U.S. person there, and actually I gave the U.S. Address, but it evolved to the Deputy Secretary of Defense the next year, and then I think since that, all the Secretary of Defenses have made that a key opportunity. Now, I think the regional structure is much improved since then. I mean, now you see, both the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense at the different forums. I think Ash Carter's out in Hawaii next week, if memory serves me correctly, because I just got an invitation to bring all the defense ministers, the ASEAN defense ministers, to Hawaii. So, we haven't had that structure within Asia and the Pacific, and I think it started developing in early 2000s, and now is reaching a certain level of maturity.
As you're aware, of course, we've been talking about this pivot to Asia,
right,
for a while now, and others have pointed out that the pivot to Asia really started under Bush, not Obama. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's interesting. You go back and look at the national security policy of probably the last 3, maybe 4 presidents, and I think all of them start with our preeminent security and economic interests are going to be in Asia. And now we've gotten distracted a little bit due to the Middle East and now even Europe. But I clearly believe that to be true. As a conversation I had in Singapore, as we decided whether it's pivot or rebalance, I believe the right term was the reaffirmation to Asia and the Pacific. We had started rebalancing well before that. I can remember in my office as the PAC Fleet Commander when we made the decision to change the submarine force posture from 60% in kind of the Atlantic and NATO and 40% in the Pacific to 50-50, and that occurred in the early 2000s, and we started that rebalance. During the period of time I was the Pacific Fleet Commander, we started the movement of moving submarines from Hawaii and the West Coast to Guam, and we put 3 submarines in Guam because we saw Guam as clearly part of East Asia, and we wanted to get them closer to where our security interests were. We had been working on, as I said, efforts with Singapore. Pretty clear that the movement of things like the littoral combat ship to Singapore, all these initiatives, had probably an earlier birth. So, I'm very comfortable with the rebalance or the reaffirmation. I thought it was directionally correct, but that doesn't presuppose that, one, we had either diminished our efforts in Asia, or that we hadn't already, started the ball moving in that direction before.
Did it make your job harder as commander that even though this was going on, that the direction was clearly moving towards the Asia, that nonetheless there were all these developments in the Middle East that really sort of sucked the oxygen out of the room, as one of other interviewee put it.
Yeah, I mean, in a perfect world, you'd have hoped that you could have focused exclusively on Asia and because of its importance, but that isn't the way it is, and so you play the hand you're dealt, and I think that the goodness of all this was that when I looked at after 10 years of war, the relationship with our allies and partners, and actually the new relationships that had been developed in Asia were really pretty strong. So, not only did we not erode, or diminish, those important partnerships, I think we frankly fortified them. Indonesia's a great example. I mean, at the end of the tsunami relief effort, I think the Pew Research came out and said the American position and an approval in Indonesia had doubled, or I mean, you've got the numbers, I don't, but so despite that, and the huge consumption of resources and attention and combat capability, I think we were able to maintain and maybe even improve our position.
Did you have many personal meetings with President Bush?
Of course, we met every year. We had an opportunity to go to the White House and sit down and talk about key concerns and challenges in the region. So 3 times in that context, President Bush came to Hawaii and paid a visit and dedicated 2 days of his time to talk to the leadership there and all the things you would expect him to do. But he provided a solid 2 hours of one-on-one time, just to sit down and talk about Asia and the Pacific. So those were wonderful opportunities, and I felt he was hugely engaged and obviously was tremendously well understood the issues at hand in Asia and the Pacific, and he was very involved. I mean, he involved in the China-Taiwan peace, and involved in the arms sale piece, and involved in the security in Northeast Asia, as well as the counterterrorism issues.
And what were your meetings with other senior officials like? What were your interactions with Dr. Rice, for instance?
I would, obviously when the president came out, Connie came out with her, and she was the national security advisor for the majority of my tenure. I think I was the first person to pay a call on her when she was the Secretary of State. Right after she'd been confirmed, I think I was the first or second person through the door. So, that relationship was very good. It wasn't something that I had to rely on because we're kind of working the day-to-day issues, and as you point out, I remember one conversation with her when, as she said, things appear to be going just about right here, and so, excuse us if we don't spend a lot of time picking up the phone talking to you.
And did you have any impressions of Vice President Cheney? Did you have much interaction with him?
A little bit of interaction, primarily on China. Secretary Rumsfeld, after we put together some of the China planning and some of our thoughts on how to approach China, Secretary Rumsfeld took me over to the Vice President and provided him the same brief, and he was very engaged. And so those were the kinds of opportunities with the Vice President.
Do you feel like he asked the right questions? He was
knowledgeable? He was very knowledgeable. He was very focused understood the issues. He tried to get to Hawaii. We worked on a visit, but it was no. He was very insightful on all of the China issues that I discussed with him.
So between 2002 and 2005, when you retired as commander, how would you describe the evolution of the U.S. approach to East and Southeast Asia? Was there an evolution? Was there a gradual change or shift in priorities or focus?
You know, I think the biggest change that I saw was kind of a recognition within the Department of Defense that there's the counter-terrorist effort where you're going after the terrorists and you need to interdict them. That there had to be a longer view as to how we were going to deal with the radicalization of an Islamic population and those folks that and so an effort to deal with kinds of the things I mentioned about Indonesia and Malaysia was clearly much better understood it evolved during that period of time. I saw it in the policy shop and in OSD to a much greater extent.
So when you handed over the baton, I don't know what it is that you hand over in the Navy.
Yeah.
What was the key advice that you gave to your successor?
Well, I think the things that I thought were kind of critical going forward was we needed to continue to evolve this force posture and footprint in Asia because, as I said, we really hadn't addressed that in a significant way for 40 or 50 years, and so things like our force posture in Japan, if we didn't continue down that path and address it and get out of these areas that were encroached, modernize our relationship with Japan in terms of their ability to participate, and you've seen some of the things that Prime Minister Abe has done more recently. That it'd be difficult to sustain it. In other words, there'd continue to be accidents, incidents, things that would be very difficult politically for the Japanese leadership to deal with. And that same feeling, I had the same feeling about Korea too, that we needed to modernize that relationship. So that was kind of at the top of my concerns. I think second was clearly China, and that we needed to get China back on, right? Maybe not back on, but off the roller coaster from a mill-to-mill level. In other words, during my time, you would see this thing where you started the mill-to-mill piece started to ramp up, and it reached a peak, and then something would happen. There'd be an arms sale to Taiwan. There would be an incident, like in the Balkans, where this relationship would go back down, to the nadir, and this just wasn't healthy in order to deal with the kinds of interactions and potential incidents that might occur, like the EP3 or so that we needed to be consistent, with China, and we would probably find that there were in the vast majority of the situations, our interests aligned, but there would always be some 20-25% of the situations where they didn't align, and we needed to be consistent in terms of upholding the rule of law, adherence to international norms, all of those key tenets by which we operate. So that was number two. And number three, I would say was making sure that we ensured the operational readiness of the force. In other words, you can get into a kind of a pattern within the Pacific where all of your efforts are kind of in the political military arena, the diplomatic, and you're not working toward an operational capability, and you hope you'll never have to employ it, but being able to ensure your readiness to deal in a much more complex environment, and in particular case right now in Asia, where area denial, access to the operating areas that we really believe are important to achieve our mission is key. And if you can't demonstrate that capability, I mean, real capability, then it's you can't enforce the policy that's provided to you from the National Command Authority. So important to understand that, and part and parcel to that. I mean, there's the unique U.S. capability is then how you build capacity within the rest of the partnership, because you're not going to find a situation that occurs in the current day and age where you're going to go it alone. It just isn't going to happen for all the reasons that just because nobody has enough capacity on their own now. You have to have access. You have to have the political, diplomatic, and international support to carry on any significant effort.
After you were relieved of your command, and I don't know if it would be accurate to say that you have been now looking at events from the vantage point of an outsider, perhaps. Do you think that developments have been how you would have liked them to be? Did these concerns that you highlighted, have they been followed through? Have they been borne out as they should have been?
Yeah, I've stayed pretty well engaged. I held the General Shalikashvili chair at the National Bureau of Asian Research for, I think, 7-8 years. I just recently stepped down, and of course that got me to Asia on a regular basis and kept me tuned up and on the policy side, and allowed me to continue any number of relationships. So I think in the main they have moved forward. I think the force posture and footprint thing effort has moved forward, although very slowly. The Guam effort has. We've made more investment. I guess we're investing at the rate of about $300 million a year. We have yet to move Marine Number 1, from Okinawa to Guam. So that piece hasn't moved at the pace we would like it to. It requires significant investment. The Japanese are part of that investment. If I look at Korea, we've made certainly progress on the footprint in terms of consolidating facilities, or first-rate facilities. South of Seoul, we've made limited progress on the command arrangements, largely due to North Korea's poor behavior, poor but consistently poor behavior. So that one is. I think it's still on the right track, but we haven't gotten there yet. With respect to China, You know, that report card probably isn't quite as positive. As you know from both the East Asian situations and the Southeast Asian situation, you know, China just hasn't been helpful in those areas, and obviously there's significant concerns on the side of the international community. And you've seen the recent court rulings and how those are, I think, it seems to me our policy and the as enunciated by the President and Secretary of Defense on China are about right. But you know, how we follow through on the execution of that is a key issue right now. I'm happy to see that Japan has moved forward and is modernizing their defense policy. I think you know, they continue to evolve, and I think they can be they'll be a more effective regional player. And although I think it'll be appropriately constrained, you know, there won't be force protection, a force projection capability there. But I think that's moved in a positive sense. I think our relationships in Southeast Asia are really on the right track. There are blips along the road. Obviously, the situation in Thailand isn't what we would like it to be, and we'll have to persevere through that. But you know, what we shouldn't do is sever the military piece while we're working through the political piece, because as we've learned in the past, it's not helpful. It wasn't helpful in Indonesia when we did it years ago. You know, the Philippines right now is a little bit of a concern. We'll see this. Maybe this may just be a short-term piece, because in general that relationship was certainly on the mill-to-mill level was moving clearly in the right direction. But you know, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, new relationships with Vietnam, which are very strong. You know, the situation in the rest of the ASEAN countries, even Myanmar, you know, all appear to be on the right vector.
What's your assessment of the maritime security in that area now?
In terms of the things that I was concerned about in terms of maritime domain awareness, or the RMSI term, I mean, I think it's improved. You know, clearly the cooperative relationships are much better. I think intelligence sharing is pretty good. So I think that's improved. The piece that has probably moved the furthest since I departed would be India. I think that relationship, you know, which is, you know, I visited India a number of times, and I think there was always, you know, certain suspicions as to, you know, how reliable a partner we would be, you know, based on nuclear issues and others. You know, I don't think those are completely eradicated, but I think they're better, and as they should be. They need to be. It's the world's largest democracy. What'd I miss?
Well, recent reports have suggested that there is a resurgence of terrorist activity in Southeast Asia. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that. Did the U.S., for instance, after your term, actually, in the last 10 years, 8 years, did the U.S. take its eyes off Southeast Asia in that regard?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, you know, we've been in the Philippines you know, we're just now drawing down that, over the last year, drawing down this is not due to the Philippine president's comments. I mean, we felt like we'd accomplished all we could in southern Mindanao with the JSOTF there. So, you know, that was up until 2015. I think from an exercise standpoint, the counterterrorism piece and the intelligence sharing, appears to me to be still pretty strong. I'm not aware of the criticism, and of course I'm a little dated right now over especially the last 2 or 3 years. But I can't talk to that, and so you'd have to help me with what the specific concerns are.
Oh, there've just been reports. I think there was one coming out of CSIS not long ago, saying that there is now some concern that cells in Southeast Asia, Indonesia specifically, perhaps southern Philippines as well, are in some ways, building ties with ISIS in the way that they used to have ties with Al Qaeda. And I'm not sure exactly what kind of resources are being exchanged there, but just a new sense that Southeast Asia is again becoming a bit of a hot spot.
Yeah, I'm just not privy to any intelligence in that area. I can understand with the rise of ISIS, where there would be a heightened sense of concern that as you see ISIS pop up in North Africa, and you see cells that have been inspired by ISIS operate and even conduct attacks, that there would be concerns there, but I don't have any firsthand knowledge.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about something on a more personal level. What would you say, if there was one, was your professional high point in your tenure as commander?
Well, there were a lot that come to mind. I think, and these aren't in any priority order, but I think at the conclusion of my tour, the tsunami relief effort, I think was particularly rewarding from a number of standpoints. One was I thought our response was very effective and immediate. We acted essentially on Christmas Day, and it was a Boxing Day tsunami. We did it in a manner that I think the countries in the region, whether it was Thailand or especially Indonesia or even Malaysia, Sri Lanka, appreciated. We were hugely sensitive to their sovereignty, and that we wanted to, work in support of them. I think that what I took away from it is a lot of the investment that we had made in the region, such as with relationships, paid off in a huge way. I'll give you a personal example. We wanted to be able to fly out of Butterworth in Malaysia because it was directly across from Aceh to provide relief supplies and so on. And of course, Aceh has a very small footprint, runways up there, so tough to do it from other places. And I called General Zahidi and said, we'd really like to help in this manner, and Butterworth seems to be a logical place. And 24 hours we had access. Now, if you'd done that through the normal diplomatic channels, I mean, not that we didn't run it through diplomatic channels too, but you wouldn't have been able to respond with that kind of alacrity. When right after the tsunami hit, the first call I got was from Peter Cosgrove in Australia, who was their chief of defense, and we talked through what kind of capabilities we had that would be helpful, and the best way to approach the Indonesian military leadership. And we both had a relationship with the chief of defense of Indonesia, as I said, and we had very strong relationships with all the country teams. So, the ability to talk to the ambassador in Indonesia and synchronize these efforts, because he's in support of the president of Indonesia, and we're in support of him. And all that investment, in kind of prior effort, exercises, relationships, and so seemed to pay off in a big way.
Was there any question I should have asked and did not?
I don't think so. I'm kind of searching right now, as you can tell. I'm in the scan mode. But I think we hit the big pieces. I think the relationships, in Asia were very strong. One of the things that the Pacific Commander has had, I think, has been a huge advantage to him is he has had access to the senior leadership in Asia. Whether it's being able to meet not only with our country teams and our mill-to-mill people, but also the political structure in a place like Japan, and meeting with Megawati in Indonesia, or Arroyo in the Philippines, and I think that's helpful in being able to understand how we can meet U.S. security responsibilities and throughout Asia, and understanding what's important to these nations. So it's kind of unique. It's clearly not operating outside of our responsibilities. I think it can be helpful to the nation.
Well, thank you very much, Admiral. It's been an honor.
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.